Hello everyone, I'm Dave. Clone Hero version 1 came out recently with drum support, and that's a lot of fun. But what if you could play the real drums along with Clone Hero? Better yet, what if you could use Clone Hero to learn how to play the drums? I'm going to show you how to do that today. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is download the required software. We're going to need Loop MIDI, Voicemeeter Potato, Reaper, along with its optional Rayout ASIO driver, and Steven Slate drums. Once you have everything installed, we'll start with opening up Loop MIDI and creating a Loop MIDI port by pressing this button. Then we can go ahead and open Reaper in a new project. The first thing that we need to set up in Reaper is the sound device. So we do that by going to Options, Preferences, Audio, Device, and in this case, I'm using the dummy audio. However, you can use whichever audio device you like. One important setting that we need to make sure that we set is this buffer size. It's available on all of the devices. We need to set it down to 128. What this is going to do is it's going to give us the lowest latency possible from when we hit the drum to when we hear the drum. The next settings that we need to look at are the MIDI device settings. So right underneath devices, MIDI devices, and we want to enable our Loop MIDI port on the output side and enable our drum set. In this case, I'm actually going to use my keyboard as my drum set is in the other room. Enable that as an input. All right, so now that all of our inputs are configured, let's go ahead and set up a drum channel. To do that, we're just going to double click down here, and that's going to add a channel. Then we'll double click in this lower section here and give it a meaningful name. Drums in this case. Next, we're going to route our MIDI output through this channel. So the first thing that we need to do is arm it for recording. And then you want to select Input MIDI, and then select your MIDI device. On my kit, I have 5 toms and 4 cymbals. Obviously, that's one more tom and one more cymbal than is required by Clone Hero. The extra cymbal I've set up as a dedicated hi-hat with the hi-hat control switch. I've gone into the map section and I have mapped hi-hat shank loosen and hi-hat shank closed and closed tight all as yellow on the hi-hat with the hi-hat switch down. Hi-hat shank open is mapped to blue. I then have my next cymbal as a dedicated yellow as the left crash or splash cymbal. I also have my 5th tom mapped as a second snare, because sometimes, particularly in harmonics charts, yellow and red are mapped, but the drummer actually just hits the snare with both hands. So to map a sound, click MIDI Learn and then hit the trigger that you would like to assign to that sound. The next piece of software that we're going to want to start setting up is Voicemeeter. So let's go ahead and open that. And the first thing that the Voicemeeter wants you to do is select your A1 main output device. We're going to select the ASIO Rayout driver. Once that's selected, we can go into the menu and go to System Settings. And we want to adjust our sample sizes for our Windows-based drivers, our KS drivers, as well as our ASIO drivers. For the most part, 512 is going to be just fine. But you can play with it and move it up and down to see what gives you the best experience as far as latency and glitchiness. We also want to be able to get our drum sounds out of our DAW, out of Reaper, so that we can hear it. We're going to send ASIO channels 1 and 2 into hardware input 1. You can do this by left-clicking here to assign the channels. Right-clicking will reduce the number. Next, we want to send our Windows audio into Voicemeeter. We can do that just by simply selecting the Voicemeeter input as our sound device. So now we can see that this channel strip has some of our programs showing up. The next thing we need to do is make sure that the sample size is lower so that we can make sure not to introduce any latency. So we can just right click on that and select a smaller size. The default is 7168. I generally go for 3072. We can also set up our actual speakers. So the device that you had set in Windows, we're going to select that same device as our A2 hardware output. In this case, I'm going to choose the KS USB audio codec for my speakers, as it gives me the best latency. So if I go to Menu and then System Settings, we can see that A2 is the USB audio codec. Its buffer size is 512. However, we can change that down to 128, and that if you see that it takes, then you know that it supports it and it should be fine, as long as it sounds okay. You may also set up any additional hardware devices that you would like to simultaneously listen to this audio from. The last thing that we need to do is make sure that Voicemeeter is sending our audio streams to the right places. So for our game audio that's coming in on Voicemeeter VAIO, we want to go down to the sends and volume section. And by default, A1 is already selected. So that means that if we are sending a stereo signal, which Clone Hero is going to be, to Voicemeeter VAIO, it's going to come in on channels 1 and 2 of Voicemeeter VAIO. And when we pass that to A1, it's going to go in on channels 1 and 2 of Rayarout ASIO. You'll want to deselect B1, as B1 is this input. So we don't want to send our audio into Voicemeeter and then right back into Voicemeeter. So we need to make sure we deselect that. Then, over on our hardware input, which is where we're going to get our signal from our DAW, we don't want to send that signal to A1 because it just came out of the DAW. We don't want it to go back in. That would create an infinite loop of audio and feedback and noise. But we do want to send it to our actual speakers. And if you would like to stream your drumming, send hardware input 1 to B2 as well, which is the Voicemeeter aux. Then in your streaming software like OBS, you can set Voicemeeter aux as your, you can set Voicemeeter aux as an input. And don't forget, if you want low latency on that as well, lower the sample size. Let's create a track for our system audio. Double click, we'll call it system. And we need to arm it for recording and send a stereo signal from channels 1 and 2 of the Rayarout driver. So now, when we play a system sound, we should see that show up on the meter. We'll just quickly go ahead and set up our outputs as well. So we'll go to the master section and click on the routing button. And we will add a hardware output of Rayarout 1 and 2, which will send our audio from our DAW back into Voicemeeter on hardware input 1. If you're using an audio interface with Reaper, then you can go ahead and add an additional hardware output to your audio interface's outputs. So now that we are able to get our game audio into our DAW, we are able to mix our game audio with our drum audio I would also recommend that for most songs in Clone Hero, you drop the volume about 10 decibels. All right. So now that we've got our game audio and our drums mixed, the next thing we need to do is get our drum MIDI back out so that we can use it in Clone Hero. So we'll add another channel, and we'll name that loop MIDI. Then we're going to go to our drum channel and click on the routing button. We're going to add a send. We're going to send the signal from our drum channel to our loop MIDI channel. We do not want to send the audio to this channel, so we will disable that. And we will send all MIDI. We will hook up the MIDI cable. And finally, we need to say when we want to send that MIDI output relative to when the drums channel receives that input. We need to select pre-FX. The last thing we need to do in Reaper is click on the routing button for our loop MIDI channel and select the loop MIDI port as our MIDI hardware output. So now you've got basically everything set up and you're able to play Clone Hero with real drums. Pretty much all you have left to do is just turn down the drum track in your song in the volume settings in Clone Hero. I want to show one bonus thing. So earlier I mentioned that the system audio has to be turned down to approximately -10 dB for the Clone Hero songs. This is because otherwise the Clone Hero music will drown out the drums. So what we can do, let's go to Options, Preferences, scroll all the way to the bottom, go to Control OSC Web. Let's add one. We're going to add a web browser interface. All the default settings are fine, so we'll go ahead and click OK. You may get a network security prompt. Just select both private and public networks. That way you never have a problem accessing it. This will all be within your home network anyway. Then, from any device in your home network, you can just go to your IP address port 8080, and what that will give us is this interface, which is essentially Reaper's interface, but it's a little bit more basic. So we just click on the system channel, and then we're able to make volume adjustments to the system volume. So for the quieter songs, like the ones from Guitar Hero, we can turn them up a bit. And then when we go back to play a harmonics rock band song or any of the louder songs, you can turn it down without having to switch applications. You can just do this from your phone. Thank you all for watching, and happy drumming.